The master builders of the world's greatest monuments vanished without a trace. This is the profound mystery of the sudden disappearance of the skilled artisan groups behind monumental stonework, a puzzle that challenges everything we know about human achievement. By the end of this journey, you will understand the startling patterns behind these historical vanishings and what they reveal about our own world. How could the architects of entire cities simply fade from the record, leaving only silent stone as their legacy? And what catastrophic event stops a civilization's creative heart? When you look at an ancient ruin, what do you believe happened to the hands that built it? These disappearances are not about a culture slowly changing over centuries. We are talking about something far more abrupt, a silence that falls in the middle of a sentence. The defining feature is the archaeological cliff, a sudden stop in the record as jarring as a skipped heartbeat. One season, a stone block is being shaped with impossible precision. The next, the tools are simply left where they fell, the quarry site abandoned, the half-finished monument standing as a permanent question mark. This is the signature of the vanishing artisan. These were not just laborers, they were the guardians of a living science, a body of knowledge so specialized it was often kept within families or closed guilds. Think of it not as a job, but as a sacred trust. They knew how to read the stars to align a temple, how to calculate the perfect angle for a pyramid that would stand for millennia, how to shape and move stones that modern engineers still struggle to explain. Their work was the very identity of their civilization, the stone embodiment of its power and belief. And then it was over. Following these events, the archaeological record shows a stark decline in quality. Later structures, even those built in the same place, are cruder, simpler. The sophisticated joinery, the complex geometry, the sheer scale, all of it vanishes from the record as if it never existed. This tells us the knowledge itself was lost. It was not shared, it was not written down in a way we can find. It simply went with them. This complete and sudden severing of a cultural lifeline is the mystery we are compelled to solve. What force is powerful enough to erase not just a people, but their entire way of seeing and shaping the world? The colossal stones of Malta stand as a silent testament to a forgotten genius. On these sun-drenched islands, structures like Haga Kim and Mnajdra were erected from blocks weighing many tons, all by a people who left us no written history to explain their methods or their minds. Their architectural mastery is breathtaking. They employed a technique called corbelling, carefully stacking stones in ever-shrinking circles to create domed chambers, a principle that would not be widely seen again for thousands of years. Even more remarkably, their temples are precisely aligned with the solstices and equinoxes. On specific days, sunlight pierces the inner sanctuaries in a display of celestial harmony, proving these builders were not just moving rock, they were encoding their understanding of the cosmos into the very landscape. This level of sophistication demands a specialized class of artisans, individuals who held profound knowledge of engineering, astronomy, and sacred geometry. Then, around 2,500 years before the Common Era, every trace of this culture vanishes. The steady rhythm of construction halts, the quarries fall silent. The archaeological record shows no invasion, no mass conflict. Instead, researchers suggest a slower, more insidious collapse. Evidence points to a period of severe environmental hardship. The land, once fertile, may have faced soil depletion from generations of farming. A changing climate could have brought prolonged drought, leading to food shortages and societal strain. The very community that could move mountains of stone may have been undone by a failure of the harvest. the knowledge of how to align a temple with the stars was powerless against a silent, empty sky. What remains is a haunting duality, the enduring stone against the complete erasure of the hands that shaped it. This pattern of a vibrant civilization brought to its knees not by a dramatic battle, but by a creeping fragility, is one we will see repeated in even grander scales. Far to the east, another society reached an urban perfection that would not be seen again for millennia. The cities of the Indus Valley civilization, like Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, were marvels of early urban planning, laid out with a grid-like precision that feels almost modern. These were not chaotic, growing settlements. They were masterpieces of intentional design, built by a class of urban planners and engineers whose names are lost to us. Their genius is visible in the details, the standardized bricks that fit together perfectly no matter which building you examine, a uniformity that speaks of a powerful, centralized authority and a shared, exacting knowledge. They created the world's first sophisticated urban water systems, with drains, canals, and even indoor bathrooms, managing the flow of water with a skill that protected the health of a vast population. This was a civilization that had solved problems most ancient societies could not even conceive of. And then, around 1900 years before the Common Era, the pulse of this great civilization simply faded. The Great Bath at Mohenjo-Daro, a central feature of civic and perhaps spiritual life, was no longer maintained. The granaries which fed the complex urban machine fell silent. The meticulous order that defined these cities gave way to a slow decay. The artisans, the engineers, the planners, the very people who understood how to keep this intricate urban machine running, vanished from the historical stage. What could possibly explain the loss of such profound and practical knowledge? Researchers point not to a single cataclysm, but to a series of interconnected challenges. The lifeblood of the civilization was its rivers, and evidence suggests their courses shifted dramatically over time. This could have disrupted the agricultural surplus that supported the urban centers and the specialized artisan class. Climatic shifts may have brought periods of extended drought, straining resources to their breaking point. Yet, the mystery deepens when you look at the archaeological record. There are no layers of ash from great fires, no heaps of weapons pointing to a violent end. Instead, we see a gradual but definitive departure. The people seem to have simply left their magnificent cities, scattering into smaller, simpler villages. And with that dispersal, the complex, centralized knowledge of urban planning and civil engineering evaporated. It was not conquered, it was forgotten. The artisans did not just stop working. Their entire profession, their guilds, their accumulated wisdom, ceased to exist as a cultural force. This leaves us with a haunting question about the nature of advanced society. How could something so organized, so brilliantly constructed, become so utterly lost? The answer may lie in that very specialization. Their knowledge was so advanced, so integrated into the functioning of their complex cities, that it could not survive the city's collapse. When the urban order fragmented, the specialized minds that maintained it had no place to go, no way to pass on their craft. The stone and brick they left behind stand as a monument not just to their achievement, but to the startling fragility of even the most advanced human systems. The labyrinthine palace of Knossos feels like a world out of time. Its complex layout of courtyards and corridors, its vibrant frescoes depicting leaping dolphins and graceful athletes, and its remarkably advanced plumbing systems all speak of a culture that valued beauty, comfort, and architectural ingenuity in equal measure. These were the Minoans of Crete, and their artisans were true masters. They developed what we now call a seismic construction, designing buildings with flexible wooden frameworks to withstand the island's frequent earthquakes. Their artistic style was uniquely their own, full of fluid lines and a deep connection to the natural world. This was a sophisticated, vibrant civilization at its peak. Then, around 1450 before the Common Era, a catastrophic event shattered their world. The colossal volcanic eruption on the nearby island of Thera was one of the largest in human history. It would have sent towering tsunamis crashing into the northern coasts of Crete, blanketing the island in thick layers of suffocating ash and plunging the region into a volcanic winter. While the Minoan people did not vanish overnight, their civilization never recovered from this blow. The intricate social and economic structures that supported their specialized artisan class were shattered. The palaces, the very centers of their cultural and artistic life, were damaged and then abandoned. This is where the mystery of the artisans deepens. We see a complete and abrupt end to the distinct Minoan artistic style. The vibrant frescoes are no longer painted. The unique pottery forms and decorations cease to be produced. The knowledge of aseismic construction seems to fade away. This suggests something more profound than just a societal collapse. It points to the decimation or total dispersal of the artisan guilds themselves. These skilled individuals, the keepers of a unique cultural fingerprint, were likely among the most vulnerable in such a disaster. Their survival depended on a stable, wealthy society that could commission their work. When that society crumbled, their specialized knowledge had no anchor, no way to be passed to the next generation. It was lost in the ensuing chaos of famine, displacement, and breakdown. The Mycenaeans from the Greek mainland eventually moved into the power vacuum, occupying sites like Knossos. They adopted certain Minoan symbols and architectural layouts, but their work lacks the original finesse and spirit. The copies are heavier, more militaristic, and less refined. This clear decline in quality is the archaeological signature of a broken chain of knowledge. The masters were gone, and the apprentices never had the chance to finish their training. This forces us to confront a difficult question about the relationship between human achievement and the raw power of nature. How can a single day of geological violence erase centuries of accumulated cultural genius? The stones of Knossos stand as a beautiful, haunting reminder that our most advanced creations are often far more fragile than we dare to believe. Their genius was a living thing passed from hand to hand and mind to mind. These artisans did not work from detailed architectural blueprints or technical manuals as we understand them. Their most profound secrets, the methods for selecting the perfect stone, the precise angles for cutting, the complex logistics for moving colossal weights, were guarded within closed guilds. This knowledge was a sacred trust transmitted through years of rigorous practical apprenticeship. A master would demonstrate the feel of the stone, the correct strike of the hammer, the chants or rhythms that might have coordinated a team of workers. It was a complete, embodied education, one that could not be fully captured in symbols on a page. The guild was more than a workplace. It was a family, a school, and a vault for the most valuable asset a civilization could possess, its applied intelligence. This system created masters of unparalleled skill, but it also created a profound and hidden vulnerability. The entire cultural library of their technical ability resided in the memories and muscles of a very small, specialized group. What happens when that living library is permanently closed? The chain of transmission, that delicate link from one generation to the next, is terrifyingly easy to break. A single period of widespread illness, a conflict that draws all the young men away, or a sudden famine that scatters a population, any of these could sever the connection forever. The apprentice, halfway through their training, would never learn the final, most crucial secrets. the master would take those secrets to their resting place, and a body of knowledge built over centuries would vanish in a single lifetime. This is the core of the mystery. Their expertise was not stored in a cloud or a library. It was woven into the very fabric of their society. When that fabric tore, the knowledge simply unraveled. It was both deeply powerful and heartbreakingly fragile, a brilliance that could be extinguished by a single strong wind. This inherent fragility of pre-literate knowledge is what makes these historical disappearances so absolute and so hauntingly final. Deep in the humid jungles of ancient Mexico, a different kind of mystery was being carved from solid stone. The Olmec civilization left behind a legacy of colossal heads. 17 have been discovered to date, each one a towering portrait weighing over 20 tons. These are not crude monuments, they are masterpieces of realism carved from single blocks of basalt with expressive, individual faces, adorned with distinct helmets that suggest they represent powerful rulers. The sheer effort involved speaks of a sculptor class at the peak of their power. They had to first identify the perfect basalt source in distant mountains, then somehow transport these gigantic stones through swamps and rivers without the wheel or draft animals, and finally, carve them with exquisite detail using only stone tools. This was not a casual artistic endeavor. It was a monumental undertaking that would have commanded the resources of the entire society. Then, around 400 years before the Common Era, the carving simply stopped. The great heads were complete, and no more were ever made. The civilization that produced them entered a period of decline, and the specific knowledge required for this grand-scale portraiture vanished from the region. Why would a society abandon such a powerful symbol of its own authority? The later Maya and Aztec civilizations, for all their own incredible achievements in architecture and art, never revived this particular tradition of the colossal head. The artistic lineage was broken. This abrupt end forces us to look beyond environmental causes and consider a powerful social dynamic. Could the very system that created the heads have led to their downfall? The labor and resources required for such projects were immense, demanding a vast workforce diverted from farming and other essential tasks. This concentration of effort likely served a small, powerful elite. Researchers have proposed that over generations, the social cost of this labor-intensive glorification may have become too high. The people who moved the stones and carved the faces might have eventually questioned the authority of the rulers depicted upon them. A widespread social shift, a quiet revolt against the established order, could have dismantled the political structure that commissioned the art. When the ruling class falls, the artists who serve them often find themselves without patrons, their specialized skills suddenly obsolete. The tradition of the colossal head was not just an art form, it was a pillar of political power. And when that pillar crumbled, the master carvers and their unique knowledge faded into history, leaving only their silent, stony giants to stare out from the jungle, their purpose and their makers long forgotten. A society's ability to create wonders rests on a foundation we rarely see. The grandest monuments were not built by a civilization merely surviving, but by one thriving with a surplus of food and stability. This surplus supported the artists, the engineers, the master planners, freeing them from the daily work of finding sustenance. But what happens when that foundation begins to crumble? Evidence from across the ancient world points to a recurring, invisible adversary, a slow-moving crisis that could dismantle the most advanced societies from within. Paleoclimatology, the study of ancient climates, reveals startling patterns. Ice cores from Greenland and sediment samples from lake beds tell a story of profound environmental change. In regions like the Near East and Mesoamerica, Scientists have identified periods of severe, multi-generational drought that align precisely with the collapse of major construction projects. A century of diminished rains would have been a quiet catastrophe. Crop yields would have fallen season after season. The grain stores that fed the cities and the specialized workers would have slowly emptied. In this new reality, the priorities of a society shift dramatically. The great quarry, once the heart of a cultural ambition, becomes a distant memory. The complex logistics of moving a 50-ton stone block become an unthinkable luxury. The master artisan who once held a sacred, honored place now faces a simple, brutal choice. Their unique skills in shaping granite are useless when the fields are barren. To feed their family, they must lay down their specialized tools and pick up a farming hoe. The knowledge that took a lifetime to master is not written down, it lives in the hands. When those hands are forced to perform different tasks for a generation, that embodied wisdom simply fades. It atrophies from disuse. The apprentice who never got to finish their training cannot pass on what they never fully learned. This was likely the fate of many artisan groups. They were not conquered or slaughtered, but made obsolete by a changing world. Their society, under immense environmental pressure, could no longer afford the vision they represented. The stones they left behind are a testament not only to their skill, but to the delicate balance that allows human genius to flourish. It forces us to ask a difficult question about our own world. How many of our own modern marvels depend on a stability we simply take for granted? Carved into the rose-red cliffs of the Jordanian desert, the city of Petra feels like a miracle. Its breathtaking tombs and temples are only half the story. The true genius of the Nabateans was not just in what they carved from stone, but in what they coaxed from the sky. In a land receiving only a few inches of rain each year, they built a hidden, liquid engine that turned a barren canyon into a thriving metropolis. This was the work of a master class of hydrologists, artisans of water itself. They engineered an incredibly sophisticated network of channels, dams, and cisterns, all designed to capture, control, and conserve every single drop of precious rainwater. Small dams slowed the rush of seasonal floods, while narrow channels carved along canyon walls, sometimes for miles, guided the water into vast underground cisterns that could hold millions of gallons. This hydraulic mastery was the city's lifeblood, allowing gardens to bloom and a population of thousands to flourish in the heart of the desert. It was a knowledge system perfectly adapted to its specific, unforgiving environment. Then, in the year 106 of the Common Era, the Roman Empire annexed the Nabatean kingdom. Petra was not destroyed. In many ways, it was integrated into the greatest economic network the world had yet seen. But this integration came with a cost. The focus of trade and power shifted northward to Roman-controlled routes. More critically, the Roman approach to water management was different, favoring massive, centralized aqueducts over the Nabatean system of decentralized, localized catchment. The delicate, intricate knowledge of maintaining the canyon's specific water channels was no longer the paramount civic priority. This is where we see a different kind of vanishing. The Nabatean hydrologists, as a distinct and specialized artisan class, began to fade. Their unique, context-specific expertise was not violently erased, but gently made redundant. Over generations, as the old masters passed away, the subtle tricks of the trade were not fully passed on. How do you clear a silted channel carved high on a cliff face? What is the precise angle for a dam in a specific wadi to maximize water capture without being destroyed by the next flash flood? This was granular, local knowledge, and it began to erode. The city persisted for centuries, but it was living on the borrowed time of a decaying system. When a major earthquake in the 4th century damaged the water network, the expertise needed to fully restore it was likely already gone. The slow decline of Petra was not a sudden collapse but a long, quiet goodbye. The water dried up and the desert patiently began to reclaim its own. This mystery forces us to confront a subtle but powerful truth. A civilization's most vital knowledge can disappear not through catastrophe but through quiet neglect. When a culture is absorbed into a larger, more dominant system, the specialized arts that defined its unique success can be the first things to be lost in translation. The silence of Easter Island is one of the most profound in human history. We all know the Moe, the great stone faces gazing inland, but their story is only half the mystery. The island's true tragedy lies in a lost voice, a written one. This was Rongo Rongo, a unique script carved onto wooden tablets, a language of glyphs that no one alive today can read. The artisans who carved these symbols were scribes in a world without trees, the keepers of a civilization's memory. Their disappearance is a masterclass in how a society can unravel from the inside out. The story begins with a paradise lost. When Polynesian settlers first reached the island, it was covered in a lush palm forest. This ecosystem was the foundation for everything. The trees provided timber for rollers and levers to move the massive moe, wood for fishing canoes that reached deep waters, and fuel for the fires of a growing population. For generations, the islanders thrived. The statue carvers and the Rongo Rongo scribes were likely specialized classes supported by this surplus, their skills central to the cultural and spiritual life of the community. But the forest was not infinite. Generation by generation, the trees were cut down for statue transport, for construction, for canoes. The clearing of the land led to soil erosion, washing away fertile topsoil and reducing crop yields. The bird populations which nested in the trees vanished. Without large trees, no one could build new seafaring canoes to access deep water fish. The island's resource base, the very engine of its culture, was being systematically dismantled. What followed was a desperate societal collapse. The archaeological record shows a period of intense conflict. Spear points become common in later settlement layers. Cave shelters were used for refuge. The grand statue cult itself fell. The very platforms of the moe were desecrated, the great statues toppled by rival groups. In this new world of violence and scarcity, what place was there for a scribe? The specialized knowledge of the Rongo Rongo carvers became a luxury the society could no longer afford. Their craft, which once recorded genealogies, histories, and chants, was suddenly irrelevant in a fight for simple survival. The artisans themselves may have perished in the conflict or been forced to abandon their life's work to simply find food. The final, heartbreaking severing of this knowledge came with the arrival of outside ships in the 19th century. The few individuals who might have still understood the script, the last living libraries of their people, were tragically taken as slaves, their voices lost forever in foreign lands. When researchers finally took an interest in the strange carved tablets, there was no one left to ask. The Rongo Rongo script is now a locked door, and the key was thrown away not by a single catastrophe, but by a slow, consuming hunger that turned a civilization against itself. It stands as a stark monument to a simple, terrifying truth. A society can be incredibly sophisticated, capable of moving mountains of stone and inventing its own written language, yet still fail to see the limits of the world that sustains it. A conqueror's victory is measured not just in land but in memory. When a powerful empire expands, it often seeks to overwrite the cultural identity of the conquered, and the first targets are frequently the artisans, the very people who give that identity its permanent form. These master craftsmen represented the soul of a civilization. their hands shaping the stone and symbols that proclaimed a unique worldview. To subdue a people, a new ruling power might dismantle this creative heart. In some cases, the most renowned artisans were seen as assets or threats. They could be taken from their homes and forced into servitude, compelled to use their skills for the glory of their new masters, building monuments that celebrated the very power that had crushed their own culture. In this new role, their work was stripped of its original meaning, becoming a hollow echo of their former genius. Their unique techniques, once passed from parent to child in a sacred tradition, were now directed toward foreign ends, and over time, the original purpose behind those methods could fade from memory. In other strategies of control, conquerors would actively ban traditional artistic practices and spiritual symbols, making it illegal to carve the old gods or build in the ancestral style. When a young apprentice has no legal way to practice the craft of their forebears, that knowledge withers in a single generation. The intricate language of form and symbol, developed over centuries, becomes silent. This process is not merely a change in fashion, it is a systematic erasure. The conquering culture absorbs what it finds useful and extinguishes the rest, ensuring that the old symbols of power and belief are replaced with new ones. The loss is profound. We are left with a historical record where the vibrant artistic voice of one people is abruptly replaced by the imported style of another. The stones themselves tell this story of suppression, showing a clear before and after, a vibrant tradition replaced by an imposed uniformity. This theme of cultural assimilation as a mechanism for vanishing knowledge becomes starkly clear when we look at the ambitions of history's most expansive empires. The silent, soaring walls of Great Zimbabwe rise from the African savanna as a testament to a different kind of genius. Here, the mastery was not about moving impossibly heavy stones, but about a perfect, intimate relationship with the material itself. Between the 11th and 15th centuries, the Shona civilization constructed a sprawling city of stone, creating immense, curving walls assembled without a single drop of mortar. This was the art of dry stone walling elevated to its highest form. Each granite block was carefully selected and shaped to fit perfectly with its neighbors, locked in place by gravity and a profound understanding of geometry and pressure. The resulting structures have endured for centuries, their stability a quiet rebuke to the idea that complexity requires complex materials. This was the work of a master guild of masons, artisans who held the secrets of the stone in their hands. Their city became the heart of a vast trading network, dealing in gold and ivory that connected the interior of Africa to the coasts and beyond. The wealth this generated supported the masons, allowing their unique craft to flourish. Then, around the middle of the 15th century, the city was abandoned. The great stone enclosures, once bustling with life, fell silent. The archaeological record shows no signs of an invasion or a destructive conflict. Instead, researchers point to a slow, grinding pressure, an economic and environmental reality that simply made the city unsustainable. The very success of Great Zimbabwe may have led to its quiet end. Generations of a large, concentrated population would have placed immense demands on the local environment. The forests for fuel and building material may have been depleted. The soil, over-farmed to feed the city, may have lost its fertility. Furthermore, the trade routes that were the source of its wealth could have shifted, bypassing the city and cutting off its economic lifeblood. In this new reality, the specialized skills of the master masons became a luxury the society could no longer support. The intricate knowledge of how to split and shape granite, passed from master to apprentice for hundreds of years, suddenly had no practical application. The guild likely disbanded, its members scattering to smaller villages to take up farming, their unique skills fading with each passing year. The magnificent city they left behind stands as a powerful monument to a simple, unsettling truth. Even the most stable and brilliant human achievements are tethered to the delicate, invisible systems of economy and environment that make them possible. When those systems falter, the artisans, the keepers of a civilization's most tangible beauty, are often the first to vanish. A civilization's grandest ambitions are written in stone, but they are funded by gold. The artisans who carved those dreams into reality did not work for free. Their craft depended entirely on a system of patronage, a powerful economic engine driven by kings, priesthoods, and wealthy states. These patrons provided the food, the materials, and the social standing that allowed a master sculptor or engineer to devote their entire life to perfecting a single, monumental skill. When that economic engine seizes, the creative world it supports grinds to an immediate and absolute halt. Imagine the bustling workshops of the Khmer Empire at the height of its power. Teams of stone carvers, each specializing in a different aspect of the work, are transforming sandstone blocks into the intricate devotas and bas-reliefs that adorn Angkor Wat. They are fed from the royal granaries, their tools supplied by state-sponsored smiths, their entire existence justified by the divine king's command to build a temple worthy of the gods. This is a perfect, self-contained ecosystem of creation. Now, imagine the slow unraveling of that system. A prolonged conflict with a neighboring kingdom drains the royal treasury. A shift in international trade routes bypasses the empire, cutting off a vital source of revenue. The king's coffers, once overflowing, grow thin. The first thing to be cut is not the army, but the art. Quarry masters are told there will be no more orders for sandstone. The sculptors are informed their monthly ration of rice will be halved, then ended. The grand project, half finished, is simply abandoned. The artisans, now unemployed, face a brutal choice. Their entire identity is bound to a craft that society can no longer afford. How do you feed your family when your unique talent is carving celestial nymphs from a rock? You do what you must. You lay down your fine chisels and pick up a plow. You become a farmer, a laborer, a soldier. The knowledge that took you a lifetime to acquire is never passed on. Your apprentice, who is just learning how to shape the curve of a lotus bud, never completes their training. Within a single generation, the living library of technique, the accumulated wisdom of centuries, simply vanishes. We see this pattern etched into the ruins of the Maya city-states. Their soaring pyramids and ornate palaces were the ultimate expressions of royal power and divine favor. But these projects required a massive investment of labor and resources, all coordinated by a centralized authority. When that authority fragmented, likely due to a combination of environmental stress and internal conflict, the patronage evaporated. The stonemasons who knew the secrets of the corbelled arch, the plaster makers who created the smooth, painted surfaces, the artists who depicted the stories of the gods, all of them were cast adrift. Their skills, so vital to the old order, held no value in the new reality of scattered villages and subsistence farming. The unfinished structures they left behind are more than just ruins. They are economic artifacts, the frozen moment when the money ran out and the music stopped. This reveals a profound and unsettling truth about human achievement. Great art and architecture are not just products of individual genius. They are the flowers of economic surplus. When the root system of that surplus, the trade, the agriculture, the stable governance withers, the most beautiful and complex blossoms are the first to fall. The artisans do not disappear in a dramatic exodus. They fade away quietly, their voices silenced by the simple, crushing weight of an empty treasury. High on the sun-baked cliffs of the American Southwest, entire cities were tucked away in the stone. the ancestral Pueblo people, often called the Anasazi, built their world into the very rock face, creating multi-story dwellings that seemed to grow naturally from the canyon walls. Their masonry was a masterpiece of adaptation, each sandstone block carefully shaped and set with mud mortar to form sturdy, lasting homes. These were not simple shelters but complex communities, architectural marvels that demonstrated a deep understanding of their environment. Then, around 1300 CE, every one of these cliffside citadels fell silent. The pottery was left on the floor, the tools were set down, and the ladders were pulled up for the last time. What force could make an entire people walk away from such incredible handcrafted homes? The evidence points to a slow-moving disaster, a mega-drought that gripped the region for decades. Imagine the lifeblood of this civilization, the seasonal rains, simply failing to arrive year after year. Springs and streams, once reliable, would have dried up. The land that sustained their crops of corn, beans, and squash would have turned to dust. In this new, parched reality, the intricate social bonds that held these communities together began to fray. The very cooperation needed to maintain their advanced masonry and water catchment systems would have been tested beyond its limits. Disagreements over dwindling resources, from water to fertile land, likely fractured the community. This social disintegration is the key to the artisan's disappearance. The knowledge of how to select the perfect sandstone block, how to mix the mortar, and how to construct a stable, multi-story building in a cliff alcove was not written in a book. It lived within the community itself, passed down through generations of practice. When the Great Migration began and families scattered across the landscape to survive, that tight-knit knowledge community was shattered. They did not vanish from the earth, but they did vanish as a distinct architectural culture. As they migrated and integrated with other groups, their specific building traditions were no longer practical or necessary. The need to build a defensive cliff dwelling was replaced by the need to adapt to new lands and new neighbors. The master masons in their new homes likely had to learn different ways of building, and their old, specialized skills slowly faded from memory with each new generation. The empty cliff palaces stand as a powerful testament to a difficult truth. Even the most resilient and ingenious societies can be undone not by a single blow, but by a prolonged strain that pulls them apart at the seams. The artisans did not just stop working, their entire world of knowledge dissolved through the quiet, relentless pressure of dispersal. This quiet dispersal is perhaps the most human of all these vanishings. It is not a story of sudden cataclysm, but of slow, reluctant adaptation. When a homeland becomes untenable, whether from a changing climate or the threat of conflict, the bonds of a community are tested in the most fundamental way. A guild of master stonemasons facing such hardship would face an impossible choice. Do they remain together and risk collective hardship, or do they scatter in search of individual survival? Often they chose the latter. They would pack their tools, the most tangible symbols of their identity, and journey to new lands. Their skills were a passport, a valuable trade that could earn them a place in a foreign court or a growing city. But this integration came with a cost. The new patron, a local chieftain or a different religious order, would not want a temple that looked like the one from the old country. They would demand their own local styles, their own cultural symbols. The mason, now a migrant worker, had to adapt. The subtle curve of a column that was a signature of their homeland would be replaced by a straighter, more angular local design. The specific ratio used to determine the height of an arch, a secret passed down for generations, might be abandoned because the new society used a different mathematical principle. With each compromise, a piece of their unique artistic identity was sanded away. The knowledge itself did not die, but it was remade. It was blended into the local traditions. losing the distinct characteristics that made it a recognizable school of thought. The artisans, as a cohesive group with a shared vision, ceased to exist. They became individuals, their former unity dissolved by the simple need to eat and provide for their families. Their children, growing up in this new culture, would learn a hybrid craft, a mixture of their parents' techniques and the dominant local methods. The pure, undiluted lineage was broken. Within a generation or two, the original fingerprint was gone, absorbed into the larger tapestry of a new civilization. This is a disappearance that leaves no ruins, only a subtle shift in the archaeological record that is incredibly difficult to trace. How do you find a people who did not die out, but simply chose to stop being who they were? Their legacy is one of quiet influence, a ghostly whisper in the stonework of empires they helped to build, their own story sacrificed on the altar of survival. The sandstone of Angkor Wat breathes with the life of its creators. Every wall, every pillar, every corridor is a canvas for an epic story, carved with a precision that feels both impossibly grand and intimately detailed. This was the work of a master artisan class operating at the absolute peak of their abilities, supported by the immense wealth and power of the Khmer Empire. Their craft was the empire's voice in stone, a declaration of divine favor and unshakable authority. Yet by the 15th century, this powerful voice had fallen silent. The empire faced a slow convergence of challenges. Shifting international trade routes began to bypass its centers, slowly draining the royal treasury. At the same time, a series of prolonged droughts interspersed with intense monsoon rains put the sophisticated water management system, the very hydraulic heart of the empire, under severe strain. These environmental and economic pressures were compounded by a profound spiritual shift as the state religion transitioned from Hinduism to Theravada Buddhism, a tradition that favored simpler, more modest monuments. The economic engine of imperial patronage, which for centuries had fed the quarries, supplied the tools, and supported the entire hierarchy of master carvers and their apprentices, simply sputtered and stalled. The great construction projects were abandoned, half-finished. The artisan guilds, their purpose and their paymaster gone, disbanded. The masters of sandstone carving, the individuals who knew how to bring a mythological battle to life with a chisel, found their lifelong skills had no market. To survive, they had to turn to other work, the intricate knowledge of how to select the perfect block, how to achieve depth and shadow in a bas-relief, how to execute the flowing, graceful lines of a Devata goddess was never formally passed down. The chain of apprenticeship was broken within a single generation. This loss is starkly visible in the archaeological record. Later additions and repairs to the temple complex, even those made just a few decades after its prime, are noticeably cruder. The lines are less confident, the figures less expressive, the overall work lacking the sublime refinement that defines the classic Khmer style. The masters were gone, and with them went the soul of the stone. The temple itself was never lost to the jungle, but the living genius required to create another like it had vanished completely. This raises a haunting question about the nature of legacy. How can a civilization that could build a mountain of carved scripture, a city of gods, so completely lose the very knowledge that made it glorious? The answer may lie not in a single dramatic fall, but in the slow, quiet unraveling of the complex systems that make artistic genius possible. Before the hills of Rome were crowned with marble, a different people shaped the land of Italy. The Etruscans were masters of the earth, building entire cities from the ground up with advanced drainage systems and sophisticated urban layouts that would later influence their powerful neighbors. Their true artistic soul, however, was reserved for the afterlife. They painted their underground tombs with scenes of breathtaking vitality, images of feasting, dancing, and joyful celebration that transformed a resting place into a vibrant echo of life itself. These were not somber monuments, but declarations of a unique worldview, a culture that embraced the moment with a passion and artistry entirely their own. Then, over the course of a few centuries, this brilliant flame was gradually, systematically snuffed out. The rising Roman Republic did not simply conquer the Etruscan city-states, it absorbed them. The Roman genius was for incorporation, for taking what it found useful from a subject people and discarding the rest. They adopted the Etruscan arch, their engineering principles, even their religious rituals. But the vibrant, symbolic heart of Etruscan art held no value for the pragmatic Roman state. The tomb painters, the keepers of this distinct visual language, found themselves in a world with no use for their craft. A new cultural hegemony was being enforced, one that prized Roman virtue and uniformity over Etruscan individuality. The old patrons of art, the Etruscan nobility, were either co-opted into the Roman system or stripped of their influence. Why would a young Etruscan apprentice spend years learning the precise brushstrokes to depict a sacred dance when their future now depended on learning Latin and adopting Roman customs? The market for their unique artistry dried up. The living chain of masters and apprentices which had carried this knowledge for generations was broken link by link. The last Etruscan tomb painters took their secrets with them, their unique understanding of color, composition, and spiritual symbolism dying a quiet, unrecorded death. Roman artisans, brilliant in their own right with concrete and monumental sculpture, never saw a reason to replicate the intimate, joyful scenes found in the Etruscan necropolises. The knowledge was not destroyed, it was simply made irrelevant, allowed to fade away through a process of cultural assimilation so complete that even the Etruscan language itself was forgotten. What remains are the silent, painted chambers, a beautiful and haunting paradox. They preserve the spirit of a people whose identity was systematically erased by the very civilization that would go on to build an empire. This forces us to ask a difficult question about the nature of history itself. How many other vibrant artistic voices have been silenced not by catastrophe, but by the slow, quiet weight of a more dominant story? A silent killer can erase a legacy far more effectively than any invading army. Throughout history, waves of illness have swept through populations, but their impact is rarely uniform. Consider the unique vulnerability of a master artisan guild. These individuals did not work in isolation. They lived, trained, and collaborated in tight-knit communities, often within the crowded urban centers that were the very heart of their civilization. This density, so crucial for the transmission of complex skills from master to apprentice, would have made them tragically susceptible to the rapid spread of contagion. A single outbreak of a virulent illness striking a city's core could have wiped out a concentrated population of skilled workers in a matter of weeks. The demographic math is chillingly simple. While a farming community spread across the countryside might lose a portion of its people and eventually recover, the loss of an entire guild was a different kind of catastrophe. It was the destruction of a critical mass. The intricate knowledge of how to dress a stone, mix a unique mortar, or calculate a celestial alignment did not reside in one person, but in the collective memory of the group. When that group is suddenly and irrevocably gone, the chain of transmission is not just weakened, it is vaporized. A grand construction project, a temple or a palace years in the making, would be left frozen in time. The tools would remain, the quarries would be open, but the living intelligence required to continue the work would have vanished. This is not a slow decline, but a sudden stop, a biological end to a cultural era. We see echoes of this dynamic in later historical plagues. events that reshaped entire continents. Such a demographic shock would leave a distinct signature in the archaeological record, a stark before and after with no gradual transition. It forces us to look at the ruins of the ancient world with a new and sobering question. Could the final, silent blow to a civilization's creative spirit have been delivered not by a sword but by a fever? Their citadels were mountains made by men. The Mycenaean Greeks raised walls of such immense, rough-hewn stone that later generations believed only the mythical Cyclopes could have lifted them. These were the architects of power, masters of military engineering whose fortifications crowned the hills of ancient Greece. Their civilization was a web of palace-states, each a hub of administration, trade, and military might, all protected by these colossal ramparts. The Lion Gate at Mycenae itself stands as an eternal symbol of their strength, a testament to a society organized for dominance and grandeur. Then, in the span of a few generations, the entire intricate system came apart. Around 1100 years before the Common Era, the Mycenaean world was consumed by the Great Late Bronze Age collapse, a wildfire of societal failure that swept across the eastern Mediterranean. The grand palaces were burned and abandoned. The complex bureaucracy that kept records on clay tablets simply ceased to exist. The far-flung trade routes that brought in tin and luxury goods snapped. In this total systems failure, what place was left for the master military architect? Their specialized knowledge became instantly obsolete. The skill of designing a gate complex to repel a siege, the precise engineering required to construct a soaring beehive tomb, the very logistics of quarrying and moving multi-ton boulders, these were arts that served a centralized, wealthy, and powerful state. When the state itself dissolved into chaos, the guilds of stonemasons and engineers who possessed this knowledge were left with no patrons, no projects, and no purpose. Their craft was not just a set of techniques, it was a response to a specific set of societal conditions. When those conditions vanished, the craft itself could not survive. The evidence for this utter loss is stark and sobering. The period that followed is known as the Greek Dark Age. The archaeological record shows a dramatic plunge in material culture. Pottery becomes simpler and more localized. Writing disappears completely from Greece for centuries, and most tellingly, the art of building in stone on a monumental scale vanishes. For generations, no one in Greece built anything remotely approaching the scale or sophistication of the Cyclopean walls. Communities became smaller, more isolated, and focused purely on subsistence. The sophisticated knowledge of the Mycenaean builders did not slowly decline. It was severed in a single, catastrophic break. This reveals a profound systemic vulnerability. The most specialized and advanced members of a society are often the most dependent on that society's complex infrastructure. They are the pinnacle of its achievement, but they are also the most exposed when the foundation crumbles. The builders of citadels, it seems, cannot survive when there are no more kingdoms to defend. The great earthen pyramids of Cahokia once rose from the Mississippi floodplain like a landscape shaped by giants. Near modern-day St. Louis, this city was the heart of the Mississippian world, a sprawling metropolis centered around Monk's Mound, a colossal earthwork covering more than 14 acres at its base. Building this was not a matter of simple piling dirt. It required a specialized class of engineers who possessed a deep, practical understanding of soil science. They knew how to select different types of clay and earth, how to build in layers for stability, and how to compact the soil to prevent slumping and erosion, ensuring their structures would last for centuries. This was large-scale labor organization on a breathtaking level, the work of master planners who could coordinate the efforts of thousands. Then, by the 14th century, the city was empty. The Grand Plaza fell silent. The knowledge of how to build and, just as importantly, how to maintain these vast earthworks vanished from the region. Later cultures, like the Osage and Quapaw who lived in the area, did not continue the tradition of building massive platform mounds. They had their own rich cultures and histories, but the specific engineering knowledge of the Mississippian mound builders was gone. This points to a complete and total break in the transmission of that particular craft. What could cause such a definitive end to this earth-moving tradition? Researchers suggest a combination of environmental and social pressures. A period of cooler temperatures and poor harvests may have strained the agricultural surplus that fed the city. Some evidence points to widespread flooding that damaged parts of the settlement. In this strained environment, the social consensus necessary for such monumental projects likely fractured. The master planners and engineers, their skills suddenly without a patron or a purpose, would have seen their role in society evaporate. The intricate knowledge of soil compaction and labor logistics, passed down through generations, was no longer taught. When the last master engineer passed away without an apprentice, the living library of Cahokia's architectural genius closed forever. The mounds themselves remain silent and immense, a lasting monument to a vision that was, in the end, as fragile as the soil from which it was born. A new faith can render an ancient art form not just obsolete but dangerous. When a society's spiritual core is transformed, the very stones that once defined its identity can become targets for eradication. The artisans who carved those stones, whose hands gave form to the old gods and kings, suddenly find their life's work branded as idolatry or heresy. Their specialized skills, once the pinnacle of cultural expression, become a liability. A powerful new priesthood or ruling class, eager to solidify its authority, will often commission its own monuments to the new order, deliberately overwriting the visual landscape of the past. The old temples are not merely abandoned, they are systematically dismantled, their sculptures defaced, their altars broken. In this new ideological climate, the master carver who once knew the precise proportions for a statue of a sun god is now an outcast. Their knowledge is not just useless, it is forbidden. Who would risk teaching their child a craft that could lead to persecution? The chain of apprenticeship, which depended on cultural pride and stable patronage, is severed by fear and necessity. The artistic tradition does not fade away gradually, it is actively suppressed, its practitioners forced into silence or compelled to learn a new, approved style. This is a disappearance driven not by environmental collapse or economic failure, but by a revolution in the human mind. The stones themselves bear witness to this ideological cleansing, showing us where one world of meaning was chiseled away to make room for another. What legacy is left when the creators of beauty become enemies of the state? The jungle slowly reclaimed the great plazas of Tikal and Palenque, but it was the silence of the stelae that marked the true end. These towering stone slabs, once covered in intricate hieroglyphs and portraits of kings, were the ultimate expression of classic Maya power, and their creation was the sacred duty of a supremely skilled artisan class. These were not mere carvers, they were the scribes and master sculptors, the living historians who recorded dynastic lineages, celestial events, and royal decrees in a complex written language. Their work was the very voice of the civilization, a voice that fell permanently silent between the 8th and 9th centuries. The collapse of the classic Maya world was not a single event, but a perfect storm of pressures. Decades of intense drought strained the agricultural foundation that fed the cities. Internecine warfare between rival city-states became increasingly destructive, shattering the political order. The royal courts, the sole patrons of these elite artisans, lost their authority and their wealth. When the kings could no longer command, the artisans who carved their glory lost their purpose. The production of stelae and the use of the sophisticated long-count calendar ceased abruptly. The knowledge of how to mix the vibrant pigments for codex paintings, how to execute the precise, graceful lines of a glyph, and how to plan the narrative of a royal life across a limestone surface, all of it was tied to a collapsing system. These masters and their apprentices faded away, their unique skills becoming obsolete in a new world of survival and dispersal. The post-classic Maya that emerged later maintained a rich and vibrant culture, but their artistic focus and even their writing system were different, a clear sign of a broken lineage. The silence of the stelae is a profound lesson in cultural fragility. It shows us that even the most brilliant and complex systems of knowledge can vanish when the delicate web of patronage, peace, and environmental stability that supports them simply unravels. The stones themselves are the only record of their purpose. Across the misty landscapes of ancient Europe, the great stone circles of Stonehenge and Avebury stand as a riddle wrapped in an older riddle. Their builders, a Neolithic people who left no written history, possessed a knowledge that feels almost supernatural. They were master astronomers, aligning their colossal rings and avenues with the precise movements of the sun and moon, creating a celestial calendar carved from the earth. They were sophisticated engineers, capable of transporting sarsen stones weighing over 40 tons across dozens of miles of rugged terrain, then raising them and capping them with immense lintels locked in place by complex joints. This was not the work of a scattered population, but of a dedicated and highly skilled artisan class, perhaps a priestly order that held the secrets of the heavens and the earth. Their understanding of geometry and large-scale logistics was a form of power, a knowledge system that allowed them to shape the very landscape according to their beliefs. And then this knowledge simply evaporated. Millennia before the Romans ever set foot on the island, the great period of megalithic construction came to an end. The culture that built these monuments faded away, and their practical, technical genius was lost in the mists of time. When Celtic cultures later spread across the region, they encountered these silent, towering stones. They had no memory of the original builders or their intent. The later Druids of the Iron Age, often romantically linked to these sites, were a completely different people, separated from the Neolithic architects by thousands of years. The true purpose of the circles had already been forgotten, their practical engineering and astronomical function transforming into legend. The master builders, in their profound absence, became mythical figures. Their ability to move mountains of stone was no longer seen as a technical skill, but as the work of magic or the labor of giants. This is perhaps the most complete form of disappearance, where the artisans are not just forgotten, but their very humanity is erased, their genius reinterpreted as something otherworldly. Their legacy became a mystery that would haunt the imagination of every generation to follow, a silent testament to how easily a civilization's most profound knowledge can be severed from its own memory. That chain of knowledge, woven from master to apprentice, was as fragile as it was powerful. This was not a system with safety nets. The entire repository of a craft, from the secret of a unique mortar recipe to the precise angle for a chisel strike, resided solely in the minds and hands of a few individuals. Imagine a single, unexpected event. A master artisan, the sole keeper of a complex technique for moving multi-ton stones, falls ill. Without a fully trained successor, that specific piece of the puzzle is gone forever. There were no textbooks to consult, no digital archives to search. The knowledge died with its last living vessel. This vulnerability was built into the very structure of their world. A political upheaval could prevent a new generation from beginning their training. A conflict might draw all the young men away from the quarries for a season that becomes a lifetime. Even a localized famine scattering a community could sever that delicate thread of transmission. The apprentice, halfway through their education, would never learn the final, most crucial secrets. Their own work would forever lack that final touch of mastery, and they would have nothing complete to pass on. The chain, once broken, could not be reforged. This systemic risk is almost unimaginable in our modern world of cloud storage and universal education, but for ancient artisans it was a constant, quiet shadow. Their greatest strength, the deep, embodied learning of the master-apprentice model, was also their most profound weakness. A civilization's most advanced technical knowledge could literally vanish in a single breath, leaving behind only the silent, majestic stones that its last keepers would never be able to explain. These stonemasons of Axum carved their legacy into the sky itself. In the highlands of Ethiopia, their great stone obelisks or stelae stand as silent giants, the largest a single piece of rock weighing over 500 tons. To shape such a monolith from solid granite, transport it for miles, and then raise it perfectly upright was an act of engineering that feels almost superhuman. This was the work of a master guild, artisans who held a complete, embodied knowledge of stone, from reading the veins in a quarry to orchestrating the final, delicate lift. Their craft was the kingdom's declaration of power, a statement written in stone for all to see. Then, in the 7th century of the Common Era, the world around Axum shifted. New Islamic trade empires began to dominate the maritime routes that had been the lifeblood of the kingdom's wealth. As Axum's economic influence waned, so too did the royal power that funded these monumental projects. The great obelisks were the ultimate expressions of a centralized, wealthy state, and when that state could no longer afford them, the entire ecosystem that supported the stonemason guilds collapsed. The specific techniques for moving a 500-ton block, the intricate logistics, the secret knowledge of balance and leverage, all of it was tied to a system that had simply vanished. There was no one left to commission such work, and no new generation of apprentices to learn the craft. The knowledge was not banned or destroyed. It was simply allowed to fade from memory, a victim of a changing economic landscape. Centuries later, a new and breathtaking tradition emerged with the rock-hewn churches of Lalibela. These were miracles of a different kind, structures carved downward into the living rock. Yet this magnificent achievement represents a distinct architectural departure. It was a new artistic voice, born from a different spiritual and social context. The old Axumite way of building up, of assembling colossal stones into the air, was gone. The guilds and the unique genius they possessed had passed into history, leaving only their towering, unanswered questions etched against the Ethiopian sky. The Gate of the Sun stands alone on the high Andean plateau, a single massive archway carved from one unyielding block of stone. It is the legacy of the Tiwanaku culture, a people whose artisans transformed andesite into a complex language of symbols. The central figure on the gate is a deity surrounded by winged attendants and a calendar system so intricate its full meaning still eludes us. This was not just decoration, it was a cosmic map, a theological statement etched in rock with breathtaking precision. Their technical mastery extended deep into the stone itself, using finely crafted metal clamps to lock blocks together, a technique of sophisticated engineering that ensured stability for the ages. Then, around 1,000 years ago, the world that gave this gate its meaning came undone. A prolonged and severe drought gripped the region, a climatic shift that stretched for generations. The agricultural foundation of the Tiwanaku state, which supported the urban centers and the specialized artisan class, withered away. The people, facing an existential threat, had no choice but to disperse, scattering across the vast landscape in search of sustenance. This diaspora shattered the cultural core, the workshops where master carvers taught their apprentices the specific proportions of the sun god, the secrets of the calendar, and the precise method for setting metal clamps, fell silent forever. The knowledge was not transferred, it was fragmented and lost in the struggle for survival. Centuries later, the Inca Empire would arise and become legendary for their own stonemasonry, fitting polygonal blocks together with impossible tightness. Yet they never replicated the unique iconography of the Tiwanaku Gate. The specific technological style, the artistic vision, the entire school of thought that produced the Gate of the Sun was gone. The Inca built upon the land, but a distinct lineage of genius had been permanently severed, leaving its last great monument standing in solitary, silent testimony to a world that vanished. The great stone lions of Hattusa stood guard over a collapsing world. In the Anatolian highlands, the Hittite imperial sculptors carved a vision of power directly into the living rock, creating monumental gateways and sacred chambers that echoed the might of their empire. Their work was an official language of stone, a style defined by colossal scale, imposing guardian figures, and a distinct imperial formality. This was not merely art for art's sake, it was statecraft. The very existence of these master carvers depended entirely on the central court, the imperial administration that commissioned their work and defined their unique aesthetic. Then, around 1200 years before the Common Era, the entire system came crashing down. The late Bronze Age collapse, a wave of societal failure that swept across the eastern Mediterranean, consumed the Hittite heartland. The capital was abandoned, the complex bureaucracy vanished, and the economic networks that supplied the royal workshops snapped. In that sudden vacuum, the imperial sculptors found themselves without a patron, without a purpose, and without a state to define their art. The schools of master and apprentice, which had honed the specific Hittite imperial style for generations, simply dissolved. In the centuries that followed, smaller Neo-Hittite states did emerge in the region. They continued to work with stone and even used similar themes like lions and sphinxes, but the comparison is telling. Their sculptures are smaller, their execution less confident, the grand imperial vision noticeably absent. The later works feel like a local dialect trying to recall a forgotten imperial tongue. The specific knowledge required to execute that scale, that particular blend of majesty and intimidation, was gone. It had vanished not because the people disappeared, but because the political engine that powered their unique genius had been permanently shut down. This forces us to confront a stark reality about specialized knowledge. It can be so deeply intertwined with a specific political structure that it cannot survive that structure's demise. The artisans did not just stop working, their entire artistic identity, forged in the court of an empire, became an impossibility in a world of fractured, smaller kingdoms. Archaeologists do not only listen to what the past has left behind, they have learned to read the profound eloquence of silence. A master's workshop is not identified by a sign, but by the scatter of stone chips and the specific tools left exactly where they fell. An abrupt disappearance announces itself in the stratigraphic record as a sharp, clean line. Below that line, you find the refined pottery of a thriving culture, the specialized tools of a high art. Above it, the pottery is suddenly cruder, the tools simpler or gone entirely. There is no gradual transition, no slow evolution of style. It is a rupture, a cultural amnesia captured in layers of earth. This is the forensic science of collapse. To understand it, archaeologists use tools like pottery seriation, which tracks the subtle evolution of decorative styles over time like a visual timeline. When that timeline is cut short, when a specific, sophisticated style of part simply stops being made, it signals a break in the community that produced it. Radiocarbon dating of organic materials found in the mortar of a wall can tell us the last time that wall was maintained. If the date from a final repair aligns with a period of known drought or upheaval, it helps build a narrative of the end. These methods allow researchers to reconstruct the timeline of a loss, turning a void into a story. The most poignant evidence is often the unfinished project itself. A half-carved statue, its details only roughly blocked out, tells us the artisan was interrupted. A quarry with a partially freed stone still attached to the bedrock, the wedges and hammer stones lying nearby, speaks of a workday that never resumed. These are not planned endings, they are frozen moments of crisis. By reading this negative space in the historical record, archaeologists give a voice to the vanished. The abandoned project becomes their final, silent testimony. It is a story told not by what was completed, but by what was left eternally incomplete. Deep beneath the scorching sands of the Sahara lies a hidden network of tunnels, a silent masterpiece of desert engineering. The Garamonte civilization did not merely survive in this harsh world, they transformed it, building a vast subterranean system known as fagaras. These were not simple wells, they were gently sloping tunnels, sometimes stretching for many miles, dug deep underground to tap into ancient fossil water, a treasure of a wetter era locked in the earth. This was the work of a master class of surveyors and engineers, individuals who could read the subtle cues of the landscape to trace an invisible aquifer. They knew precisely where to dig the vertical access shafts and how to maintain the perfect minimal gradient so the water would flow by gravity alone to the surface oases below. This intricate hidden lattice turned the desert green, supporting agriculture and a vibrant civilization in a place that should have been uninhabitable. Then, after the 7th century of the Common Era, the pulse of this hidden heart began to slow. The very success of the Garamontes contained the seed of their decline. The fossil water they tapped was not a renewable spring, but a finite resource, a vast bathtub that was being drained much faster than it could ever be refilled by the scant desert rains. Generations of drawing from this ancient reserve eventually depleted the aquifer. The water levels in the Fagara tunnels dropped, and then they stopped flowing altogether. In this new reality, the specialized knowledge of the Fagara engineers became a memory of a more abundant past. The intricate understanding of how to shore up a collapsing tunnel, how to clear a silted channel deep underground, and how to navigate the complex subterranean network was no longer a vital, living skill. It was a craft without a purpose. As the desert inexorably reclaimed the green valleys, the engineer guilds that had mastered this hostile environment simply faded away. Their knowledge was not written down in manuals, but lived in the practiced hands of those who maintained the system. When the water failed, the chain of apprenticeship was broken. The last master surveyor took the secrets of reading the desert's hidden water with them. Today, the faint traces of their access shafts are all that remain, dimples in the sand marking the grave of a genius that once defied the desert itself. This disappearance forces us to confront a stark ecological truth. A civilization's most brilliant adaptation can become its most profound vulnerability when it pushes against the absolute limits of the world that sustains it. The Khmer's genius was not confined to the soft, carvable surface of sandstone. They also mastered a far more stubborn material, a peculiar iron-rich soil known as laterite. In its natural state, laterite is soft enough to be cut with a simple wooden tool, almost like a dense, heavy clay. But when exposed to the air, it undergoes a remarkable transformation, hardening into a substance as durable as stone, resistant to both weather and time. This unique property made it the perfect, hidden skeleton for their grandest projects, used for the massive core structures of temples, for foundations, and for the intricate water management systems that sustained the empire. Yet working with laterite demanded a completely different set of skills from those of the sandstone carver. It was a knowledge held by a distinct guild of quarrying experts. These artisans knew precisely where to find the finest seams of this material, how to cut the blocks while the soil was still soft, and the exact timing required for the curing process to achieve maximum hardness. Theirs was a subtle chemical art, an intimate understanding of the earth itself. With the slow decline of the Angkorian period, this specialized knowledge began to evaporate. The great demand for large-scale laterite construction projects vanished as royal patronage waned. The specific techniques for quarrying and shaping it on a monumental scale, the guarded secrets of the laterite masters, were no longer passed down to new apprentices. While local populations continued to use laterite for smaller, practical structures, the grand, precise, and ambitious applications seen at Angkor were never replicated. The locations of the most superior quarries, known only to that specialized guild, were gradually forgotten, reclaimed by the relentless jungle. This presents a fascinating layer to the mystery of vanishing artisans. It shows that a civilization's creative knowledge is not a single, monolithic entity. It is a mosaic of many interdependent subspecialties. The sculptors who brought gods to life in sandstone were one group, the laterite quarrying experts were another. And when the civilization that supported them contracted, these distinct threads of genius could be severed independently. One craft could fade into obscurity while another lingered in a simpler form, a quiet testament to the fact that a culture's memory is not lost all at once, but piece by piece, with each forgotten technique a small, final silence. Their clay captured a fleeting human moment for all of time. In the arid river valleys of ancient Peru, the Moch people developed an art form of startling intimacy, creating portrait vessels that feel less like artifacts and more like encounters. These are not generic faces. Each one is an individual with a unique expression, a specific hairstyle, even what appear to be personal scars or markings. You can see the weight of thought in a furrowed brow, the set of a jawline that suggests authority, the subtle asymmetry of a real human face. This was the work of a master guild of ceramic artists, individuals who possessed not only supreme technical skill, but also a profound, almost philosophical, interest in the human condition. They were the portrait painters of their age, working in fired clay instead of oils. Then, around 800 years into the Common Era, this vibrant civilization faced a convergence of environmental crises. Decades of intense drought were punctuated by catastrophic rainfall from El Niño events, which triggered massive floods that scoured the landscape and destroyed the intricate canal systems that were the foundation of Moch agriculture. In the ensuing societal collapse, the delicate ecosystem that supported the portrait artists was shattered. The tradition of hyper-realistic portraiture did not slowly evolve, it ceased entirely. Later, powerful cultures like the Chimu and the Inca would create magnificent art of their own, full of symbolic power and imperial grandeur. Yet they never revived the Moch's unique psychological focus on the individual. The artistic lineage was broken. The master ceramicists, their patron networks dissolved by the collapse, likely saw their specialized skills become a luxury no one could afford. The knowledge of how to mix the specific clay slips to achieve a perfect skin tone, how to capture a fleeting expression before the clay dried, how to fire these delicate, complex forms without cracking, all of it was lost when the guilds dispersed. The loss here is not of a building technique but of a way of seeing, A specific artistic vision, one that looked unflinchingly at the human face and saw a story worth telling in fire-hardened clay, vanished from the world. It is a quiet reminder that the most fragile knowledge of all can be a unique perspective, a way of asking a question that, once forgotten, may never be asked again in quite the same way. A culture's belief in itself is its most vital construction. The sudden silencing of the quarries and the abandonment of half-raised temples sends a shockwave far beyond the physical. It is a stark, public admission that the grand narrative, the story a civilization tells itself about its own power and destiny, has broken down. When the master artisans vanish, they take with them the visible proof of a society's collective purpose. The population no longer sees the stone rising, the gods being carved, the walls being fortified. This visual silence breeds a profound internal silence, a crisis of faith. People stop believing not only in their leaders or their deities, but in the very idea of a shared future worthy of such immense effort. The psychological will to undertake another generation-spanning project withers. What is the point of aligning a temple with the stars if the harvests continue to fail? Why carve a king's likeness for eternity if his dynasty has crumbled into dust? This erosion of cultural confidence can be more paralyzing than any invasion or drought. It prevents the social reorganization necessary to restart such complex traditions. A society trapped in this cycle of doubt cannot muster the collective hope or the shared sacrifice needed to teach a new generation the old, forgotten arts. The loss of the artisans is therefore both a symptom of this deeper trauma and a cause of its permanence. It creates a wound in the cultural spirit, a profound sense that the golden age has passed and cannot be reclaimed. The unfinished monuments then stand not as hopeful beginnings, but as tombstones for a civilization's highest ambitions, a permanent reminder of a future that was believed in and then was lost. A golden belt buckle from Tillya Tepe shows a man riding a sea monster, a figure whose face carries the serene grace of Greek sculpture, yet whose chariot is pulled by dragons from Central Asian myth. This single object captures a fleeting moment of artistic alchemy. It was the work of the Sicán Goldsmiths, artisans who found themselves at the most improbable crossroads of the ancient world. These nomadic people from the steppes conquered the last remnant of Alexander the Great's empire, the Greco-Bactrian kingdom, a place where Greek columns stood under the Central Asian sun. Instead of erasing the culture they found, the Yuezhi elite did something remarkable. They commissioned a new art, one that wove together the threads of their own nomadic heritage with the classical realism of the Greeks and the intricate elegance of Persia. The goldsmiths who answered this call became the architects of a visual fusion, creating a style that existed nowhere else on Earth. The hoard discovered at Tillya Tepe is their legacy, a collection where a Greek goddess wears nomadic trousers, and a coin of the Roman Emperor Tiberius is refashioned into a pendant with local symbols. This was not a haphazard mix, it was a deliberate, sophisticated school of artistry, a brief but brilliant conversation between worlds captured in gold and turquoise. Yet this conversation was cut short. The political landscape shifted again as the Yuezhi Confederation solidified into the powerful Kushan Empire. With this new, stable imperial identity came a new official art, one that was still syncretic but leaned more heavily toward Buddhist and Persian influences, creating a grander, more standardized style for coins and monuments. The specific, intimate hybrid of the early goldsmiths, that delicate balance of Greek form and steppe spirit, was no longer in demand. The artisans themselves did not necessarily vanish. They likely adapted, their skills redirected to serve the new imperial aesthetic, but the unique school of art they had pioneered, that particular blend of motifs that made a Tillya Tepe piece instantly recognizable, faded from history. The patron who wanted a Greek Aphrodite alongside a nomadic sun god was gone. The knowledge of how to achieve that specific cultural balance, passed from master to apprentice in a handful of workshops, was simply no longer taught. It was a loss of nuance, the end of a singular artistic dialect. This disappearance forces us to ask a difficult question about the nature of cultural exchange. Can the most delicate and brilliant fusions only exist in a moment of transition, in the fluid space between empires? Once a new order solidifies, does the demand for such complex hybridity inevitably fade, leaving its creators to assimilate and their most unique experiments to be buried by time? Their stone homes cling to the limestone cliffs like swallows' nests, 5 stories high and sheltered deep within a natural alcove. This is Montezuma Castle in Arizona, a masterpiece not of an emperor but of the Sinagua people. While their ancestral Puebloan neighbors built into canyon walls, the Sinagua developed their own unique architectural genius, perfectly adapted to the high desert of the Verde Valley. They were masters of dry stone masonry, carefully selecting and shaping stones to build sturdy, multi-room pueblos that needed no mortar, structures that have weathered centuries. Their survival depended on a deep, localized knowledge, an understanding of how to farm the arid land and capture precious water in a world of little rain. Then, by the early 1400s, the rhythmic sound of stone shaping stone fell silent. The cliff dwellings were carefully emptied, their entrances sealed, as if awaiting a return that never came. The people did not vanish from the earth, but their distinct culture and its specialized knowledge began to fade. Researchers point to a slow, grinding pressure, a period of extended drought that strained the delicate balance of their agriculture. At the same time, the resources they depended on, like the large trees needed for roof beams and the fertile soil along the creek bottoms, may have become increasingly scarce as the population grew. Facing this environmental stress, the community made a difficult choice. They began to disperse, likely joining with neighboring groups such as the Hopi to the north. This migration was a practical decision for survival, but it came with a profound cultural cost. The specific, collective knowledge of how to build and maintain a 5-story structure in a specific cliff alcove, the intimate understanding of the Verde Valley's microclimates for farming, the entire architectural and agricultural library held in the minds of the elders and the masons, was no longer passed down in its complete form. In their new homes, integrated into different societies, the Sinagua way of life was no longer necessary. The need for their unique cliffside architecture dissolved. The master masons, in a new context, had no reason to teach their children the old methods. The knowledge, so perfectly suited to a niche that was abandoned, simply atrophied from disuse. The silent, soaring walls of Montezuma Castle are therefore more than a ruin. They are a fossil of a specific intelligence, a way of thinking about stone and place that was once vital, and is now a quiet, empty monument to the choices a community must make when the land can no longer support its dreams. Their stone towers rise from the Sardinian landscape like ancient, weathered spines. The Nuragic people constructed thousands of these unique structures called Nurag, complex fortresses built from massive basalt blocks fitted together without a single drop of mortar. For over 1,000 years, this was the defining architectural tradition of the island, a testament to a sophisticated society of master masons and engineers. These were not simple towers, but multi-layered complexes with central keeps, interconnecting courtyards, and labyrinthine passages, all demonstrating a profound understanding of static forces and dry stone construction. The entire social and economic life of the civilization was likely organized around the building and maintenance of these stone giants. Then, the world around them shifted. Phoenician traders arrived, establishing coastal colonies and new networks of exchange. Later, the expanding power of Rome set its sights on the island. The Nuragic culture was not violently erased in a single war, but gradually, inexorably absorbed into these new, dominant systems. The knowledge required to build a Nurag was not lost in a day, but faded over generations. The intricate social organization, the guilds of masons who knew the precise way to select and balance each basalt block, the very cultural imperative that drove such monumental construction, all of it began to lose its purpose. The Roman colonists had their own architectural language, their own gods, and their own needs. They saw no use for the strange, ancient towers of the native people. There was no reason to build new ones, and no one left to teach the old methods. The tradition simply died of irrelevance, a quiet victim of cultural assimilation. The Nurag stand today as silent, enigmatic monuments, their original names and precise functions long forgotten, leaving only the enduring stone to speak for the builders who vanished into the currents of history. The echo of ancient silence finds its parallel in our own time. We are living through another great vanishing of skilled hands, not in quarries this time, but in workshops and studios around the globe. The delicate crafts of hand-loom weaving, of specific woodworking joinery, of pottery techniques perfected over centuries, are fading from memory. The cause is not a volcanic winter or a conquering army, but a slow economic tide. Globalization and mass production have made these handmade goods seem like luxuries, their creation an inefficient use of time in a world that prizes speed and scale. The master-apprentice chain, that ancient and fragile thread of knowledge, is snapping under the weight of economic pressure. Why would a young person spend years learning a complex, traditional craft when the financial reward is so uncertain? The answer, too often, is that they do not. And with that single decision, a library of tactile intelligence closes its doors. We see the same patterns that doomed the stonemasons of old. The slow devaluation of handmade goods mirroring the loss of patronage that left Khmer sculptors without purpose. The erosion is not just economic, it is cultural. When a specific style of textile or a unique method of metalwork disappears, it takes with it a piece of a community's identity, a visual language that spoke of its history and its values. This is the loss of intangible cultural heritage, the living traditions that give a culture its texture and its soul. By studying these ancient disappearances, we are not just solving a historical puzzle. We are receiving a profound lesson from the past about the fragility of human genius. The empty workshops of today are the silent quarries of tomorrow. They remind us that the value of a craft is not only in the object it produces, but in the continuity of knowledge itself, in the quiet conversation between a master's hands and an apprentice's eager mind. This connection between past and present forces a difficult question. If we can understand so clearly what was lost when the last carver of Rongorongo passed away, what are we failing to see in the quiet fading of the crafts that still, just barely, surround us? Their artistry was small enough to hold in your hand, yet it carried the signature of an entire civilization. On the island of Bahrain, the heart of the ancient Dilmun civilization, master carvers turned soft steatite stone into intricate stamp seals. These were not mere trinkets, they were the official signatures of a vast Bronze Age trading empire, pressed into clay to mark ownership, authenticate contracts, and secure goods as they moved between Mesopotamia and the Indus Valley. Each seal was a miniature universe of carved meaning, featuring elegant scenes of deities, sacred animals, and complex geometric patterns. This was a unique visual language, a code of commerce and belief mastered by a specialized guild of artisans. Their hands held the sharp tools and the subtle knowledge to bring these tiny worlds to life. Then, the economic currents of the ancient world began to shift. New maritime powers emerged, offering different routes and rival networks. The central role of Dilmun as the indispensable middleman began to wane. As the flow of wealth through its ports slowed, the demand for its most distinctive artistic product, the official seal, evaporated. The workshops where the master carvers taught their apprentices the precise pressure for a clean line, the secret symbolism behind a grazing bull, or the sacred proportions of a seated god, fell silent. There was no grand catastrophe, no invasion that targeted the artisans. They were simply made obsolete by a changing economic map. The guild, its knowledge, and its purpose dissolved back into the dust from which it came. The beautiful seals themselves became buried artifacts, their intricate language rendered silent, waiting millennia for archaeologists to unearth them. The fate of the Dilmun seal carvers is a quiet lesson in economic fragility. It shows us that a craft can be perfectly adapted to its time, brilliantly executed, and central to a culture's identity, yet still vanish completely when the market for its genius simply dries up. How many other unique artistic voices have been silenced not by a bang, but by the quiet closing of a trade route? Their pyramids rose from the desert valleys of Peru over 5,000 years ago. The North Chico civilization, centered at the city of Carol, represents one of humanity's first experiments in urban living, a society that flourished in isolation while the great pyramids of Egypt were still being conceived. These were not warriors or metalworkers, but architects of community. They built their world from stone and earth, constructing immense platform mounds and profound sunken circular plazas that orchestrated social and spiritual life. This was the work of a foundational artisan class, the original urban planners of the Americas, who understood how to shape space for human gathering on a grand scale. Their society thrived for more than a millennium, a testament to the stability of their vision. Yet this long chapter eventually closed, and the specific architectural genius that defined Carol's soup faded from the world. The knowledge of how to precisely align those vast plazas, the engineering principles for building resilient earthen mounds that could withstand seismic shifts, and the sacred geometry that gave their cities meaning, all of it was gradually absorbed into the wider, churning currents of Andean cultural development. Later, powerful cultures like the Chavin would emerge, building their own magnificent centers, but their architectural language was distinctly their own. The direct lineage to the North Chico builders had been severed. There was no violent conquest to point to, no single catastrophic event that erased their methods. Instead, it seems their unique school of thought was slowly diluted over centuries, its distinct contours smoothed away as new ideas, new beliefs, and new power centers rose to prominence. The original masters of Andean urban form became anonymous ancestors, their specific contributions blurred by the passage of time. This represents one of the most ancient and quietest vanishings, the loss of a foundational artisan class whose pioneering work became so thoroughly woven into the fabric of a continent's history that their own unique signature was ultimately forgotten. A golden funeral mask from a Thracian tomb does not simply gleam with wealth. It whispers of a world suspended between earth and sky, a culture whose spiritual life was painted in brilliant colors and hammered into precious metal. Across the Balkans, these master artisans created a breathtaking legacy. Their goldwork was not merely ornate, it was a language. Elaborate rhytons or ceremonial drinking vessels were shaped like animal heads, fusing raw nature with divine purpose. Their tomb paintings depicted vivid processions and farewell banquets, scenes meant to guide the departed into an afterlife they understood deeply. This was a unique artistic voice, a blend of fierce local traditions and the graceful influences flowing from neighboring Greece. The Thracians were not a single empire, but a collection of powerful tribes, and their art was the soul of their identity. Then came the slow, inexorable tide of history. The Roman legions advanced, incorporating the Thracian territories into their vast administrative machine. This was not always a violent erasure, but it was a profound cultural absorption. The old Thracian elite, the primary patrons of the goldsmiths and painters, were gradually co-opted into the Roman system. A chieftain's son might now learn Latin and aspire to a Roman political career, not a traditional Thracian send-off. The demand for the distinct, symbolic art that filled the tombs began to dwindle. Why commission a local artist to paint a scene of a Thracian horseman god when Roman marble statues of Jupiter were the new symbols of power and prestige? The workshops that had perfected these styles found their market disappearing. The final blow to this fading world came with the great Slavic migration centuries later. New populations moved into the lands, bringing their own languages, customs, and artistic sensibilities. The Thracian tongue itself, the carrier of so much cultural nuance, was slowly silenced, replaced by new Slavic and Romance languages. In this transformed world, the master goldsmith who knew the sacred pattern for a specific fibula, or the tomb painter who understood the precise shade of red for a ceremonial cloak, had no one to teach. Their intricate knowledge, once passed from parent to child in closed guilds, became a closed book. The chain of apprenticeship was broken not by a single war, but by generations of quiet neglect and shifting identity. The art survived, but only by being buried, hidden away in the very tombs it was created to adorn. We unearth these spectacular treasures today, but we are left with a profound silence. We can admire the technique, but the full meaning of the symbols, the stories told in the paintings, the very names of the artists who made them, are lost to us. Their legacy is one of beautiful, enigmatic objects, their cultural context erased by the relentless currents of conquest and the slow, quiet movement of peoples. What deeper understanding of the human spirit was sealed away forever when the last Thracian painter laid down their brush for the final time? Their power was a secret, locked away in the minds of the masters. These artisan guilds did not operate like open universities, sharing their discoveries for the betterment of all. Their techniques were a form of carefully guarded capital, a source of status and economic advantage in a competitive world. The perfect recipe for a specific mortar, the precise astronomical alignment for a temple's foundation, the complex logistics for moving 100-ton stone, all of it was treated as sacred knowledge, passed only from a master to a carefully chosen apprentice, often in a ceremony of initiation. This secrecy was their fortress wall, protecting their unique skills from competitors and ensuring their services remained in high demand. But every fortress has a single, fragile gate. The entire library of their technical genius existed only in the living memory of a very small, closed group. If that chain of initiation was ever broken, the knowledge simply vanished. A master could fall ill before revealing the final, most crucial secret. A conflict could prevent the next generation from beginning their training. The guild, facing external pressures, might simply disband, its members scattering before the full depth of the craft could be transferred. In these moments, the protective walls they had built so carefully became their own tomb. The measures they took to ensure their exclusivity became the very reason for their art's extinction. This is the profound and tragic irony at the heart of their disappearance. They sought to make their knowledge permanent by keeping it exclusive, but in doing so, they made it permanently fragile. The silence that followed was absolute, not because the knowledge was stolen, but because it was so perfectly protected that it could not escape its own keepers. It is a haunting lesson about the double-edged sword of secrecy. How many other brilliant techniques have been lost not to invasion or disaster, but to the simple human desire to hold a secret too close? The sprawling keyhole tombs of ancient Japan are silent giants. These enormous earthworks, shaped like a giant keyhole from above, were the final resting places for the elite of the coffin period. Building a single one was a staggering feat of social organization, demanding the coordinated labor of thousands and the minds of master planners who understood geometry, hydrology, and the sheer physics of moving earth. These artisans of the landscape directed the construction of moats and massive ramps, orchestrating a symphony of human effort to raise mounds that still dominate the terrain today. Then, in the 6th century of the Common Era, this centuries-long tradition of monumental earth sculpting came to a sudden and definitive end. The introduction of Buddhism from the Asian mainland brought a profound shift in spiritual and cultural values. The new faith, with its emphasis on impermanence and its different rituals for honoring those who had passed, rendered the old ways of tomb building obsolete. The powerful clans who had once competed by building larger and larger coffin now sought prestige through the patronage of beautiful temples and the new spiritual practices. The economic engine of patronage shifted completely. The massive labor forces and the specialized guilds of earthwork engineers were no longer commissioned for these colossal projects. They were disbanded, or their skills were redirected toward the construction of Buddhist monasteries and pagodas. The specific knowledge required for the keyhole form, the precise symbolism encoded in its shape, and the logistical mastery needed to manage such a vast workforce, all of it faded from memory. No one ever built a tomb on that scale or in that specific shape again. The tradition did not evolve, it simply stopped. The coffin themselves remain immense and enigmatic, their original names and the full stories of their builders swallowed by time. This quiet ending poses a haunting question about the power of ideas. How can the arrival of a new philosophy, a new way of seeing the world, so completely erase a physical tradition that had defined a culture for centuries? The answer lies not in conquest, but in a quiet revolution of the mind, a change of heart that left the great earth-moving artisans with no one left to build for. A Sicán funerary mask stares out with golden eyes, a face of pure hammered majesty. This was the work of the Sicán Goldsmiths, artisans who treated metal not as a mere material, but as a captured sun. Their signature creation was the tumi, a ceremonial knife with a curved blade and an ornate handle, often topped by the figure of a deity. To hold one was to hold a piece of their cosmology, a symbol of both earthly authority and celestial connection. Their mastery went far beyond simple hammering. These metallurgists were early chemists, expertly alloying gold with copper to create a stronger, richer-colored metal known as tembaga. They perfected the difficult art of soldering, fusing separate pieces of metal with an invisible seam, and they mastered complex gilding techniques that made less precious metals shimmer with a golden surface. This was not a single craft, but a symphony of specialized skills, all held within a closed guild of masters. Then the music stopped. Around the year 1100, a prolonged and severe drought gripped the coastal valleys. The life-giving rivers that sustained the Sicán agricultural base dwindled. In this new era of scarcity, the very foundation of their society began to fracture. The intricate social and religious structures that demanded golden tumi knives and radiant masks could no longer be supported. The goldsmiths, whose existence depended on a wealthy, stable elite to commission their sacred art, found themselves without patrons. Their guild, the living repository of this complex metallurgical knowledge, disbanded. The specific formulas for their unique alloys, the precise temperatures for their solders, the guarded steps for their gilding process, all of it was tied to a culture that was fundamentally changing. The Chimu people, who later rose to power in the same region, were indeed master metalworkers in their own right. They created vast quantities of beautiful and sophisticated gold work. But their artistic style was distinctly their own, more geometric and less focused on the specific Sicán deity imagery. They did not continue the production of the classic Sicán tomb in its original, spiritually charged form. The unique aesthetic fingerprint of the Lambayeque goldsmiths, that particular blend of technical brilliance and symbolic meaning, vanished from the world. It was not conquered or banned, but simply made obsolete by a changing climate and the collapse of the cultural world that gave it meaning. The silence that followed was so complete that only the dirt itself remembered their genius, waiting centuries for a careful hand to brush the dust away and reveal the golden eyes still watching. Deep beneath the rice paddies and quiet villages of Zhejiang province, a hidden world of stone waits. The Longyu grottos are not a natural formation, but a colossal subterranean complex carved entirely by human hands. 24 caverns have been discovered, each one an enormous man-made chamber supported by massive pillars and covered from floor to ceiling in a uniform, decorative chisel mark pattern. The scale is almost incomprehensible, with the largest cavern covering an area greater than 12,000 square meters. To create this, an estimated 1 million cubic meters of stone would have been painstakingly quarried and removed. This was not the work of a small team or a short-term project. It represents a mobilization of labor and engineering skill on a staggering, state-level scale. The precision is what truly confounds experts. The angles where the walls meet the ceilings are sharp and consistent. The parallel chisel marks that cover every surface are applied with a rhythmic, almost mechanical regularity, suggesting a standardized technique followed by an entire guild of master carvers. This level of organization and quality control points to a sophisticated, centralized society with a powerful reason for undertaking such a mammoth task. Yet, the historical record is a perfect blank. There is no mention of this project in any chronicle, no folk memory passed down through the generations, not even a legend that hints at the immense effort happening right underfoot. The builders left no inscriptions, no pottery shards, no tools, and no drawings. They vanished so completely that we cannot even name the civilization to which they belonged. This absolute silence is the core of the mystery. How could a society capable of such a monumental undertaking simply erase itself from history? The knowledge required was not trivial. It involved advanced quarrying techniques to prevent collapse, a master plan for the layout of the chambers, and a complex logistics chain to feed, house, and manage a vast workforce, all while maintaining a single, unwavering artistic vision across the entire complex. The complete severing of this knowledge chain is what makes the grottos so haunting. It is as if the artisans and their entire culture were swallowed by the earth they so expertly shaped, leaving behind only their silent, magnificent, and utterly enigmatic masterpiece. The stone cats of Pucará stare from the high plains with a serene, eternal gaze. In the thin air surrounding Lake Titicaca, the Pucará culture developed a stone carving tradition of profound symbolic power. Their artisans sculpted tenon heads, stones carved to fit perfectly into a wall, projecting the visages of felines and other powerful beings into the sacred space. They shaped monolithic stelae, great standing stones covered in intricate, flowing designs that intertwined human, animal, and geometric forms. This was a complete visual language, a way of encoding a world viewed directly into the enduring rock of the Altiplano. You can feel a specific artistic spirit in their work, a blend of graceful curves and potent, watchful faces that is unmistakably Pucará. Then, a new power began to rise on the horizon. The Tiwanaku Empire, emerging as a major political and religious force, gradually extended its influence across the region. The archaeological record does not show a violent conquest of Pucara. Instead, it reveals a process of cultural and political absorption. The vibrant Pucara center slowly diminished in importance as Tiwanaku grew to become the dominant capital, the new heart of the highland world. In this great societal shift, the Pucara stone carvers faced a silent, existential crisis. The Tiwanaku state possessed its own powerful and distinct artistic vision. Their iconography was more angular, more structured, centered around deities like the staff god, and presented in a grand, imperial style. There was no need for the new empire to adopt the older, more localized visual language of Pucara. So what became of the master carvers? They were likely faced with a choice that was no choice at all. To continue their work, they would have had to abandon the symbolic forms that gave their art its deepest meaning, and instead learn to carve in the officially sanctioned Tiwanaku manner. Some individuals may have done just that, their personal styles dissolving into the new imperial workshop, but the Pucara tradition itself, that unique school of thought and carving, could not survive this transition. The guild, the collective memory of what a curve should signify or how a feline's eye should be rendered, lost its patron and its purpose. The knowledge of their specific symbolism, the very stories told by the patterns on their stelae, faded with the last generation of masters who held it. The stones they left behind are beautiful orphans, their full cultural context severed by the rise of a new order. This disappearance poses a haunting question about the nature of artistic legacy in the shadow of empire. How many unique creative voices have been stilled not by destruction, but by the simple, overwhelming weight of a new cultural hegemony? The Pucara carvers did not vanish in a day, but their distinct voice was silenced in the quiet, relentless current of assimilation. A master's touch is frozen in stone, a single flake removed with impossible precision. Across a continent, from the forests of the east to the deserts of the southwest, these distinctive stone spear points tell a story of a shared mind. The Clovis people were the first great artisans of the Americas, and their signature was the fluted point, a lethal and beautiful object shaped with a technique that seems to defy the hardness of the material. A Clovis point is more than a weapon. It is a perfect technological idea, a design so effective it spread like a thought across an entire hemisphere. To create one required more than strength. It demanded a deep, intuitive understanding of the stone's hidden geometry. The Flintknapper would strike a prepared core with just the right force, at just the right angle, to pop off a long, shallow channel or flute running up from the base. This was not a random act, it was a calculated risk, a moment where the artisan's knowledge and the stone's character met. A single miscalculation could shatter weeks of work. This fluting process thinned the point, making it easier to haft securely to a spear shaft, creating a tool of unparalleled efficiency for hunting the giants of the Ice Age world. These points are found in caches, hidden away like a toolkit for the future, a testament to the immense value and skill they represented. Then, in a geological instant, the world they were made for vanished. Around 12,800 years ago, the great mammoths, the mastodons, the giant ground sloths, all of the megafauna that had been the cornerstone of the Clovis way of life, slipped into extinction. The cause is still debated, a combination of a rapidly shifting climate and the pressures of human predation. In this new, emptier landscape, the specific technological genius of the Clovis point lost its urgent purpose. The later Paleo-Indian cultures that followed were just as resilient, just as ingenious. They developed their own projectile point styles like the Folsom and the Dalton, beautifully crafted in their own right but born from a different need, a different understanding of a changed world. The Clovis flintknapping tradition did not evolve, it simply ceased. The unique knowledge of how to execute that perfect fluting stroke, the subtle pressure and precise angle, disappeared with the generation of masters who had no reason to teach it. Their legacy is a continent littered with their brilliant, silent questions, the first and one of the most complete artistic vanishings in the human story of the Americas. The stone guardians of San Agustin stand watch over a mystery as deep as the Colombian jungle itself. Here, scattered across a dramatic landscape, hundreds of monolithic statues rise from the earth. They are a breathtaking assembly of human figures with fierce, exaggerated features, powerful jaguars, and serpents coiled in stone, many positioned as eternal sentinels at the entrances to burial mounds. This was the work of a master sculptor culture, artisans who possessed a complete and complex worldview that they translated directly into monumental form. We do not know what they called themselves, and the meaning behind their haunting iconography is a language we can no longer decipher. The society that produced them flourished for centuries, its heart beating in these highland valleys until it gradually faded from prominence. Long before European ships ever appeared on the horizon, the vibrant culture of San Agustin was already being absorbed by neighboring groups. This absorption was so complete that the specific, sacred tradition of carving these particular stone guardians died out. The guilds of master sculptors, the individuals who knew the ritual significance of a jaguar's snarl or the proper proportions for a shamanic figure, vanished as a distinct artistic force. Their unique knowledge was not written down, it was held in the memory of the culture itself, and when that culture transformed, the knowledge simply dissipated. The statues remain, their silent, powerful presence a permanent question mark. They are the only testament to a sophisticated belief system and the supremely skilled hands that once gave it tangible form, leaving us to wonder what profound understanding of life, death, and the spirit world was lost when the last master carver laid down their tools. The talayots of Minorca rise from the island's rocky soil like ancient, watchful sentinels. For more than 1,000 years, the talayotic culture shaped this landscape, building a world of stone that was both practical and profoundly spiritual. Their stone towers, or talayots, provided vantage points and likely served as centers of community life. Their taulas, those enigmatic T-shaped structures formed by a massive vertical stone capped with a horizontal slab, created sacred enclosures whose precise ritual purpose we can only guess at. And their navetas, shaped like inverted ships, housed the remains of generations, honoring the passage from one world to the next. This was a complete architectural system, the product of a stable, organized society that understood its environment and its cosmos intimately. Then, in the year 123 before the Common Era, Roman legions arrived on the Balearic Islands. The conquest itself was military, but the true cultural shift was far more gradual and profound. The Romans did not destroy the talayots or topple the taulas. Instead, they began a slow process of assimilation, drawing the island's population into the vast economic and cultural network of their empire. The old talayotic social hierarchy, the very structure that had organized the labor and maintained the knowledge for these monumental projects, began to dissolve. Why would a young person learn the complex methods for moving and balancing the multi-ton capstone of a taula, when the path to advancement now lay in learning Latin and participating in Roman commerce? The Romans had their own architectural language, their own gods, and their own needs. They saw no functional or spiritual value in the unique stone forms of the islanders. The specialized guilds of talayotic builders found themselves without patrons, their skills suddenly obsolete. The intricate knowledge of how to select the specific stone, how to shape it without metal tools, and the sacred geometry that gave the tala its meaning was no longer passed from master to apprentice. The chain of transmission which had held for a millennium was quietly broken. The structures themselves were not torn down. They were simply abandoned to the elements, their original names and purposes fading from memory as the island's identity was slowly rewritten. The talayots, the talas, and the navatas stand today as beautiful, silent puzzles. They are the legacy of a people who did not vanish in a dramatic collapse, but whose creative spirit was gently, irrevocably absorbed into the currents of a new world, leaving their stone giants to guard secrets they could no longer speak. A single Mimbers bowl can hold an entire cosmology. In the arid valleys of what is now New Mexico, the artisans of the Mimbers culture transformed everyday clay into a canvas for the sacred. Their signature black-on-white pottery is instantly recognizable, not just for its beauty but for its narrative power. These were not simple pots for holding grain or water. Many were bowls placed directly over the head of the departed in burial contexts, serving as a final, painted veil between this world and the next. The scenes they depicted are breathtakingly alive. You can see rabbits sprinting through geometric borders, fish swimming in intricate patterns, and scenes of ritual that feel like frozen moments from a forgotten story. Most haunting are the illustrations that seem to depict myths, showing human-like figures interacting with animals in ways that defy simple explanation, suggesting a rich and complex spiritual life. This was the work of a master painter guild, individuals who held the cultural memory of their people in their hands. They were the storytellers, the keepers of a symbolic language painted with a brush made from a single chewed yucca leaf. Then, around the middle of the 12th century, the brushes were set down for the last time. The tradition of creating these specific, narrative bowls ceased with a finality that echoes across the centuries. The Mimbers culture itself underwent a profound transformation, shifting from their classic pit house villages to living in above-ground pueblos, a change that signaled a deep social reorganization. In this new reality, the old ways were set aside. The later pottery styles that emerged in the region, while still beautiful, are different in spirit and execution. They feature bold, black geometric designs, but the intricate, naturalistic storytelling is gone. The symbolic language of the earlier painters was not translated or adapted. It was completely abandoned. This tells us something profound. The Guild of Mimbers painters and the unique knowledge they possessed did not just stop working, they vanished as a cultural force. Their specific role in society, their reason for being, dissolved. The subtle techniques for preparing the mineral-based paint, the complex rules of composition that balanced narrative with geometry, the very stories that gave the paintings their meaning, all of it was lost when the cultural context that demanded it changed. The bowls they left behind are now scattered in museums and private collections, their silent stories still waiting to be fully understood. Their disappearance forces us to ask a difficult question about the nature of art itself. Can a specific artistic vision survive when the world that gave it purpose fundamentally transforms? For the Mimbers painters, the answer was a quiet, permanent no. Their legacy is a gallery of beautiful, silent questions, a reminder that some of the most profound human stories are told not in words, but in the graceful curve of a painted line that was never drawn again. From the silent temples of Malta to the abandoned mounds of Cahokia, the story of the vanished artisans is a haunting refrain in human history. We have journeyed through 34 mysteries, uncovering patterns of environmental collapse, conquest, economic failure, and the inherent fragility of oral knowledge systems. These disappearances remind us that human achievement is not a linear progression but a fragile flame, easily extinguished. They challenge us to value and preserve the skilled knowledge in our own world, from traditional crafts to complex technologies. Let the silent stones of these lost masters be a lesson. What is built with such effort can be forgotten in a moment. What mystery will you ponder next? Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe to continue unraveling the secrets of our past.